Prepare-se, você está prestes a cruzar para um mundo onde o medo é real. Histórias reais, fenômenos inexplicáveis, onde o sobrenatural se esconde nas sombras do Portal do Pavor. Hello, brave souls, or perhaps just the curious. Welcome to the threshold of terror, where your fears are given voice, and every story could be your last before you turn off the lights. Some doors are meant to stay closed forever, and sometimes, when we decide to open them, we find out the past hasn't quite stayed behind. My family thought it was just another locked room, but someone or something was still inside. This happened to my family, the Millers, in a remote part of Maine. An ordinary family, the kind everyone knows in small towns. God-fearing, private, with a simple routine and seemingly no secrets. Or so I believed. Everything changed the day Grandma Esther, the matriarch, passed away at 89. A widow for decades, she'd spent her final years alone in an old farmhouse, far too large for one person. A dark timber construction, with windows that always seemed shuttered, and hallways that creaked under even the lightest footstep. It was one of those houses that seemed to carry memories in its very walls, and apparently memories that preferred to remain undisturbed. Grandma Esther's death wasn't exactly a shock. Her advanced age and failing health had been a concern for years. What was truly strange was the family's reaction after the funeral. A mixture of sorrow, of course, but also a palpable tension, as if everyone there knew something significant was about to happen. "It's time," murmured my Aunt Carol, her eldest daughter, as my parents, uncles and cousins exchanged silent, knowing glances. The words hung in the air like a whisper from some dark corner of the house. We all knew what she meant. We all knew there was a room in that house that had never been opened in our lifetime. A room with a tarnished doorknob, locked since before many of us were born. A forbidden room, shrouded in mystery and silence. It was the old guest room, they'd said once. On another occasion, it was claimed the floorboards were rotten, that there were termites, that it wasn't safe, but no one, not even the most inquisitive grandchildren like my brother Ben or myself, Sarah, ever dared try that door. Grandma Esther always used to say, "What's closed needs to stay that way." And when she said something, nobody questioned it. But now she was gone. The day after the burial, her 5 children, along with a few of us grandchildren, gathered before the door. It was a grey, overcast morning. The wind whistled through the cracks in the wood, and even with all the other rooms open, the house felt darker than ever, as if it knew what was about to happen. My Uncle Mark slowly turned the ancient key, which for years had been kept inside Grandma's Bible. The lock yielded with a dry click. A strong odor of mildew, dust, and something else we couldn't quite identify escaped from the room, as if the air in there had aged along with its secrets. When they pushed the door, it groaned with a deep lament, protesting every inch as if trying to keep us out. And then, finally, the room's interior was revealed. A musty, suffocating smell billowed out from the gloom, a thick concoction of mold, old wood, and something else. Something metallic, almost like old blood. My mother coughed, covering her nose with her sleeve. My father, a wavering flashlight in his hand, took the first step inside. The yellowish beam barely managed to pierce the dense darkness that filled the space. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, with floral patterns whose colors were long gone. In places it was torn, revealing the raw timber of the house's frame. It was like stepping into another decade. Heavy, dusty drapes covered the windows, which we then saw were boarded up from the inside. Why would anyone board up a window like that? Old furniture, draped in white sheets, created a ghostly sense of absence. But there was something more, something in the air, a presence, heavy, invisible, but real. In the center of the room, a rocking chair faced the wall, and right behind it, a mirror, partially covered by a stained cloth. On the floor, a porcelain doll lay on its side, its face cracked and its eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as if it had witnessed things no one should ever see. Beside it, an iron-framed bed rested like a tomb, covered by a yellowed sheet that clearly hadn't seen daylight in decades. Nearby, a dust-covered dresser held a picture frame, turned face down. "Don't touch anything yet," my mother whispered, as if the room itself were listening. The sounds were muffled in there. Each step on the floorboards sounded distant, as if we were walking through a strange, oppressive dream. "She kept this place untouched," Aunt Carol whispered, her eyes wide. We began to explore cautiously. Dad walked over to the dresser and, using his shirt sleeve, wiped the picture frame. He turned it over. It was an old sepia-toned photograph of a young woman holding a child. The woman was Grandma Esther. I recognized her immediately. But that child wasn't my mother or any of her siblings. It was a little girl with dark eyes, wearing an old-fashioned dress and a vacant expression. "Who is this child?" I asked, though I already suspected no one there would have an immediate answer. My mother turned pale. "I have no idea. I've never seen this photo. That child, it's not me." A silent tension filled the space. Dad propped the frame on the dresser and moved towards the wardrobe. As he tried to open it, the door creaked but was locked. It had an iron latch with a thick chain secured by a rusty padlock. "Looks like someone really didn't want this opened," he said, trying to lighten the mood, but his attempt fell flat. We started checking the dresser drawers. Some were empty. Others contained relics of the past: a pair of baby shoes, a flower-shaped brooch, a notebook with its pages stuck together by dampness, and a cassette tape. Yes, an old-fashioned recording tape. Its label faded, with a single word handwritten on it. "Don't. Is this some kind of warning?" I asked, but no one replied. We took the tape to the living room, where an old boombox sat in a cabinet. Dad blew the dust off it, inserted the tape, and pressed play. The initial sound was static, a loud, irregular hiss. Then a woman's voice filled the room. It was faint, muffled, but clearly disturbed. "She's here. Don't let her out. She wakes when they listen. No, don't let them open it." The recording was cut off by the sound of something crashing, followed by screams and a sharp crack, like wood splintering. We were all frozen. The voice, it was Grandma Esther's, younger but unmistakably hers. "Is this real?" my mother murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "This tape is Mom's, but she never told us any of this." The silence that followed was heavy. We were all trying to process what we'd just heard. We decided to go back to the room. Something needed to be understood. The padlock on the wardrobe was still there, but something felt different. The atmosphere was heavier, darker. The flashlight beam flickered, as if something were interfering with it. "I'm opening it," Dad said, pulling a screwdriver from his pocket. "This wardrobe needs to be opened." The sound of the chain being pried apart echoed like a muffled thunderclap. The padlock clattered to the floor with a dry, metallic sound. Dad slowly pulled the door open. The air that rushed out was warm, as if the wardrobe had been sealing in an ancient, stagnant heat. Inside, there was only one object: a dark wooden box, carved with strange symbols that none of us recognized. "This isn't Mom's doing," my mother muttered, touching the carvings gingerly, as if afraid of activating something. The box had a small lock, a 5-pointed star-shaped keyhole. None of the house keys seemed to fit. It was as if it had come from another time, or another place. On the floor next to the wardrobe, we noticed something we hadn't seen before. A dark stain was spreading across the floorboards, right beneath the piece of furniture. A stain that looked old, yet now it seemed fresh. It was blood. In the days that followed, those of us who stayed at the farmhouse to sort through Grandma's belongings delved deeper into the discoveries from that room. The more we disturbed, the more signs we found that something profoundly wrong had occurred there. My brother Ben found under a loose floorboard another box, this one plain wood, containing ritualistic-looking objects. Burnt-down candles, symbols scratched onto scraps of paper, strands of hair tied with red ribbons, and an old photo of the girl from the portrait, Clara, but this time her eyes were scratched out with black ink, and on the back of the photo, written in a thin, shaky hand, was the sentence, "She never left here. You just didn't listen." The revelation that the girl was Clara, Grandma Esther's younger sister who had vanished as a teenager, hit us like an icy blast. A missing sister. Why had no one ever spoken of this? The next morning, the feeling in the house was no longer the same. Even with the sun trying to break through the grimy windows, a dense sensation clung to the walls. I woke up early. the sound of Grandma's voice on the tape still echoing in my mind. My face showed the strain of a restless night, filled with disjointed dreams and noises that seemed to have come straight from a nightmare. I decided to examine the objects taken from Grandma's room more calmly. At the bottom of the dark wooden box with the strange symbols, among papers in Grandma's handwriting and old newspaper clippings, was something even more intriguing, a diary. Its leather cover, cracked and coated in dust, had withstood time as if guarding more than just words. I opened it. The first page contained only one sentence, written in an almost brown, faded ink. "What enters this room does not leave unscathed." The following pages plunged into bizarre accounts. Grandma described voices in the middle of the night, knocking coming from inside the wardrobe, fleeting glimpses of a child she never officially had after Clara's disappearance. Most disturbing was her insistence on mentioning something she called the nightly visitor, a presence that appeared only when the room was reopened after being sealed. The diary also mentioned that when she first moved into that house back in 1962, the manifestations began. But they peaked in 1978, the year she decided to lock the room for good. That same year, her younger sister Clara, who was living with her, mysteriously disappeared. My stomach churned. I vaguely remembered a family story about a great aunt who went off to the city and never returned. Could this be Clara? The family always sidestepped that topic. I continued reading. In one diary entry, Grandma wrote, "I no longer know if I am the one keeping the visitor locked in, or if it is the one keeping me prisoner here." At that moment, I heard a sharp click from the living room. When I went to check, I found the old boombox on, tuned to a station broadcasting only static. The power switch was in the off position. Frightened, I ran to the kitchen, where I found Ben examining the old photograph of Grandma with the child. "Sarah, look at this. This photo," he said, his eyes wide. It was the same image, but now, looking closer, there was something wrong with the child. Her eyes looked completely dark, as if they had been blotted out or burned on the negative itself. "This can't be real," I murmured, a shiver running down my spine. "It's the same child I saw in my dreams last night," Ben confessed. I barely had time to react. A new knock echoed from the direction of the room. 3 distinct raps, as if something, or someone, was trying to get out. From that day on, the atmosphere inside the house changed completely. It was no longer just a feeling of unease. It was as if something had been awakened, something that had lain dormant for decades. That night, as we all tried to sleep, the silence was broken by a dragging sound from upstairs, from the locked room. It sounded like furniture being moved, but we knew what was in there. My younger brother, Michael, who was sleeping in the old guest room adjacent to Grandma's, felt an intense cold cut through the air, as if a door had been opened directly to the harshest winter. He pulled the covers up to his neck, but the cold seemed to come from within. His eyes fixed on the ceiling, where a dark stain slowly began to form. Something thick and dark, like crude oil, dripped from it, but with a sweet, cloying smell he couldn't identify. When he got up to turn on the light, it didn't work. None of the lights in the house worked. Only the faint glow of the moon filtered through the window. When he looked at the ceiling again, the stain was gone. In its place were words written in something that looked like dripping red paint. "She's still here." Michael ran to wake our parents. When we all returned to his room, there was nothing on the ceiling. No stain, no words. Just the darkness and the persistent cold. Mum tried to calm Michael, saying it was the stress of the situation, but Dad didn't look so sure. Since we found the diary, he'd been quieter, more observant. The next morning, while clearing out the attic, we found an old trunk, chained shut. It looked like it had been placed there hastily, covered with moldy sheets and surrounded by symbols drawn on the floorboards. The chains were rusty but still strong. Without a word, Dad went to the kitchen and returned with bolt cutters. He hesitated for a few seconds, then began to snip through the links. With each snap of the metal, the air seemed to grow heavier. When the last chain fell away, the lid of the trunk creaked open on its own with a sharp, long groan, like a scream held back for decades. Inside, there was only a porcelain doll, with glass eyes that seemed to follow our every move. Its red curly hair was intact. Its white dress was clean, as if it had been placed there yesterday. But what frightened us most was the scent that wafted from the trunk. It was Grandma Esther's perfume. Strong, floral, unmistakable. Mom broke down in tears, saying that doll had been hers as a child, but Grandma Esther had forbidden her to touch it. She said that once, as a little girl, she woke up with the doll beside her bed, even though she had put it away. After that, Grandma locked it in the trunk and never spoke of it again. That night, the doll was put back in the trunk, but this time without the chains. And that's when the events escalated. The door to Grandma's room began to open by itself, always at 3:17 a.m. Objects moved on their own. Whispers could be heard in the empty hallways, and Michael started dreaming about her, the girl in the portrait, Clara. In his dreams, she watched him from across the room, first from a distance, then closer and closer. In his last dream that week, she whispered something in his ear before vanishing. "You read the diary, now you know too much." Michael woke up screaming, but what truly terrified him was seeing beside his bed the doll from the trunk, its glass eyes fixed on him, and a small tear in its dress, where it had been stitched, revealing a piece of old paper folded many times. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper. It was a letter, and in it, the true story of the room locked for over 40 years began to unfold. When we finally confronted what lay behind the marks on the floor of that room, we realized it wasn't just a sign of violence or a struggle, but something much older, a kind of carved symbol that seemed to pulse with its own energy. The air in the room grew heavy, almost suffocating, and a sense of deep unease took hold of all of us. As we tried to decipher that enigma, we heard a sound that chilled our blood, a muffled cry coming from the back of the room where the light barely reached. Gradually, the crying became clearer, as if a child were lamenting its pain and loneliness in an eternal wait. The search for answers became a plunge into the unknown. Among the old family stories that Mom and my aunts and uncles reluctantly began to recall, we discovered that Grandma Esther had kept a dark secret, a past involving rituals and pacts, forbidden and forgotten. Every emerging detail seemed to connect us to an affliction that spanned generations, trapping the house and everyone in it, in a web of fear and suffering. But what we didn't know was that night would be marked by something even more terrifying. When the door to the room, which we had since relocked with the original key, began to creak open slowly on its own, an icy wind swept through the house, extinguishing the few candles we had lit and leaving us at the mercy of whatever was to come. Could we escape the shadow that pursued us? Or were we destined to become part of the grim history of that locked room? With the door finally wide open, forced by some unseen agency, we faced a scene straight out of our worst nightmares. Inside the room, the sheet-covered furniture seemed to stir slightly. The walls were stained with something fresh we couldn't identify, and in the center, the old trunk we'd brought down from the attic was ajar, exuding a smell of mildew and something else, something rotten. Approaching it, we found a bizarre collection of objects. The old photos were now all defaced, their eyes scratched out, letters with almost illegible writing, and the small leather-bound diary, which I had left on a table, was now inside the trunk. The diary revealed Grandma's secrets we could never have imagined, hidden rituals, pacts with forces not of this world, and a grim warning: whoever disturbs the rest will suffer the same fate. The moment we closed the diary, the room plunged into sudden darkness. A dense, cold shadow filled the space, making our breath catch in our throats. We felt, more than saw, that something was there, watching, waiting. We tried to leave, but the door slammed shut with incredible violence, trapping us in that living nightmare. Screams, strange sounds, and the sensation of being touched by invisible hands accompanied us as we tried in vain to force open the cursed room's door. Trapped inside, we felt time begin to distort. Clocks stopped. The air vibrated. The screams died down. Only one sound persisted: the rocking chair, moving on its own with a slow, steady rhythm. Guided by a strange intuition, I, Sarah, opened the diary again. The last words written by Grandma, which I hadn't seen before, were now visible in the flickering light of a single candle that stubbornly refused to go out. She only wants to be remembered. Forgetting is the curse. Affection is the key. At that moment, everyone's gaze turned to the doll, which lay on the floor where it had fallen from the trunk. Michael, my younger brother, moved by an inexplicable courage, picked it up and began to sing an old lullaby Grandma Esther used to sing to us when we were little, unaware that it was, in fact, the same song Clara used to hear before she disappeared. The shadow that dominated the room began to dissipate slowly, like mist in the sun. The chains in the attic, which we had left there, snapped on their own with a loud clang. The diary in my hands spontaneously burst into flames, burning silently, without emitting any heat. A strong wind swept through the house. The door finally flew open, and the morning light flooded the room. But something had changed. On the floor, where the doll had been, now lay an old family portrait, with everyone smiling, including Clara, now standing beside Grandma Esther, as if they had been reunited at last in peace. Michael picked up the portrait and smiled, his eyes wet with tears. The house, for the first time in decades, was silent, but it was a light silence, a silence of relief, of an ending. The affliction had been broken, or at least that's what we all wanted to believe. My family thought opening that room would mean the end of a mystery, but in truth, it was the beginning of something none of us were prepared to face, because what has been locked away for too long doesn't return the same when it's freed. And you? Do you have any idea what's hidden in your own family's stories? And what if the trouble was never with the house, but with the family? And what if, instead of freeing something, they just woke up what was sleeping? Sometimes the worst haunting isn't what's in the dark, but what we pretend we've forgotten. If this story sent shivers down your spine, then you'll want to see what's next. Here, at the threshold of terror, each account is more real, more intense, and more unsettling. So go ahead, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and share this video with someone you dare to open that room with. And tell me in the comments, would you open it or leave it locked forever? The right answer could be the difference between surviving the next story or not.